Good afternoon. My name is Caleb Williams, and we're here on another episode of The Green Link. Today, we have our guest, Dr. Danny Williams.
Hello, everyone.
And so today, we're going to be talking about genes to green and molecular biology and its relation to agriculture. Let's chop it up. If your students had to describe you in one way, what would you think they say?
Demanding.
Why do you say demanding?
I set high expectations for my students. No more than I set for myself.
That's a good thing. Sometimes you need those high expectations to push those boundaries and kind of get the best out of people and know their limits.
Of course.
What word would you use to describe yourself?
That's interesting. That's a little more challenging. One word to describe me: committed.
Committed. That's a good one. Why would you say committed?
Because when I set my mind on things, I kind of commit to those things and I find a way to achieve them the best way possible.
You sound just like my dad. He would have said the same thing. If you weren't a scientist or professor, what would you be doing today?
I've actually thought about this. Two things possibly, and I'm kind of split between the two. I would either probably be an architect.
Ooh, okay.
Because I like to design things, build things, or I would raise horses.
Okay, no, that's a good one. That's a good one. I like that one. All right, so let's start getting into the questions. So if you could introduce yourself, your name, your title, kind of what you focus on, and kind of what your current role is where you are.
As Caleb said, my name is Dr. Danny Williams. Professionally, people know me as Dr. Daniel Williams. I'm currently the chair of Biological Sciences Department at Alabama State University in Montgomery, Alabama. My work focuses on finding new ways to fight bacteria that no longer respond to antibiotics, especially those in sexually transmitted infection areas. This is a growing public issue, and my research is all about protecting people's health by staying ahead of those evolving kind of threats that are out there. My background: earned both my bachelor's and a master's degree in biology from North Carolina Central University. Then I completed my PhD in microbiology from North Carolina State University. After that, I continued my research through postdoctoral work at Emory University in Atlanta, where I deepened my kind of focus on microbial science and public health. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to work on organisms from all three branches of life, meaning bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes, which has given me a broad kind of understanding or perspective of how life functions at the microscopic level. Before coming to Alabama State University, actually, I spent 17 years as a tenured associate professor at North Carolina Central University, where I also served several years as assistant chair of the Department of Biological and Biomedical Sciences. That experience kind of helped shape my passion for leadership, mentorship, and building a strong academic program.
So it sounds like we have a real professional with a lot of stuff under his belt.
Yeah. So I kind of moved to Alabama for twofold. I wanted the opportunity to actually be chair of my own department, and its mission was aligned with what I had in mind. And also, my wife is from Alabama. And so here I get a chance to lead impactful research, mentor the next generation of scientists, and kind of help shape the future of microbiology and public health.
So kind of to start getting into the questions and kind of just starting to develop that green link between microbiology and what you do and agriculture and your day to day. Tell us what you do, of how your work impacts people in their day to day. I know that you mentioned that your main thing is getting ahead of the game and getting ahead of these three domains of life and being able to protect people in different ways. But what are you protecting them from, and what ways are you protecting them?
So, in general, in lay terms, I guess, what I do is search for natural compounds. Basically, these tiny chemicals made by microbes or the other types of microorganisms that can literally fight bacteria that no longer respond to regular antibiotics that we use daily. These are the kinds of bacteria that cause infections that are harder to treat, like drug-resistant Staphylococcus aureus or E. coli, for example. This work matters because antibiotic resistance is a growing problem around the world, and not just in the United States. It means that common infections, surgeries, or even minor injuries could become dangerous if we run out of those effective treatments. Thereby, by identifying new bioactive compounds, we're helping build a next generation of possible antibiotics. So even though my work happens in a lab setting, the goal is to protect people in everyday life, and whether it's helping someone recover from an infection or keeping hospitals safer or making sure we have the tools to fight future health threats.
So, kind of to start building this bond between microbiology and safe practices in microbiology and building those resistance and stuff and comparing that to agriculture to poke the soil. Have you ever worked with microbes in agriculture, such as soil health or pulling compounds from different plants? Or have you seen different microbes and that originate from things that are related to agriculture? In my experience, I've seen that there are many sicknesses and transmissions that come off of bugs and different pests, and then they get into like plants and soil and stuff like that. And when humans consume them, or it gets in our system, it starts to affect our health.
Okay, so there are many parts to your question, so I'll try to tease out as best as possible. So, first part, I would like to say that, one thing people experience all the time without realizing it connects to my field is taking antibiotics, like I mentioned. Whether it's from a sinus infection, strep throat, or after surgery, antibiotics are part of everyday kind of healthcare. What many don't realize is that the antibiotic resistance is making these treatments less effective over time, and that's becoming a big issue. My work finding new bioactive compounds to fight resistance against bacteria is directly tied to making those kind of everyday treatments continue to work. Without new solutions, even minor infections could become very serious over a period of time. So while people may not think about microbiology when they take a pill, the science behind it is what keeps those medicines safe and effective.
Yeah.
Now, as it relates to microbiology, as it relates to agriculture, well, I don't necessarily do as much research directly involving agriculture as much anymore, but I have done some. I worked with an organism called Azotobacter vallandii. It's a type of bacteria. This bacteria plays a big role in sustainable and organic farming, if you will. One of the most things that it does is it fixes nitrogen, right? So basically, it takes nitrogen from the air and turns it into a form that plants can actually use to grow. Okay, that means farmers can use less synthetic fertilizers, which saves money and it's better for the environment, as one example. It also helps plants grow by producing natural substances like plant hormones. These boost root development, help plants grow stronger and a lot faster. On top of that, Azotobacter improves soil health by increasing organic matter and making nutrients like phosphorus more available for plants. Farmers can simply apply Azotobacter in a couple simple ways by coating seeds with before planting, or they can mix it in the compost or its soil, or add it directly to the soil. It's natural, eco-friendly, and a way to kind of support healthy crops and sustainable farming. And so that's some of the research I have been involved in. It was
What are some, in your opinion, what are some exciting trends that you are seeing in microbiology, whether it be a new development or a new thing to tackle? What are some new things that you are seeing which is changing how we take antibiotics and how the development of antibiotics kind of support our system? What are some exciting things that you are now seeing that are popping up?
so microbiology as a discipline has the ability to make our life very safe and sustainable. One big area is in agriculture, of course. Scientists are using microbes that benefit and help plants to grow naturally without needing as many chemicals, fertilizers, or pesticides. That means healthier food, cleaner soil, less pollution. In waste management, for example, microbes are being used to break down food scraps and organic kind of waste through composting and even special digesters that turn waste into energy. So now we're turning waste into energy. This helps reduce the number of landfills used and creates natural fertilizers and even renewable energy at times. Microbes also play a role in cleaning up pollution. Certain types of bacteria can break down oil spills, toxic chemicals in soils and water. And this is generally what we call bioremediation. It's
Mm,
like nature's cleanup crew, if you will.
yeah.
And as far as health and safety, microbiology is used to detect kind of harmful bacteria in food and water before people get sick. We also develop probiotics, vaccines, and natural alternative to antibiotics in the field of microbiology. So, in a nutshell, whether it's growing food, managing waste, cleaning up the environment, protecting our health. Microbes are tiny but powerful little building tools for building a safer and more sustainable future that we have.
Like you noted, that microbiology is starting to take, or it's not even starting to take, but it has been proven to take a very major role, kind of recycling nutrients, recycling things, creating energy, and holding a number of different processes. And so I wanted to ask you that could some of these bacteria that are naturally forming be harmful to our human health?
Yes, some microbes are can be harmful to human health, but just as many are just as beneficial, more beneficial than harmful. So microbes actually play a huge role in keeping us healthy, even though we think of them as only as germs. So most people walk around, they refer to microbes as germs. Our bodies are actually homes to trillions of microbes, especially in our gut area and on the skin. And many of them are incredibly helpful. They help us digest food, absorb nutrients, they even produce certain vitamins like B12 and vitamin K. They also help support our immune system. So it's important to have a healthy balance of microbes that can help protect us from harmful bacteria and viruses. And this is done through what we call kind of crowding them out or signaling our immune system to respond to those bad kind of uh, organisms. In fact, research shows that having a diverse and balanced microbiome, which that's just all the organisms that are on or in the body, can lower our risk of things like allergies, obesity, and even mental health issues. So, yes, of course, not all microbes are good. Some can cause infections and illness, which is why hygiene, vaccines, and antibiotics are important. But overall, my take on it is that microbes are essential partners in our health, and understanding them better helps us find ways to prevent and treat diseases. So, yes, there are a lot of bad organisms, but the good ones outweigh the bad ones by far.
You
Right.
say that I'm taking these antibiotics, and let's say that I'm not taking them when I'm supposed to, or I take the wrong dosage, and then the bacteria or the microbiomes that are in my system that I'm supposed to get rid of, I actually build a resistance to that. So, what would be the step by step process of identifying that this certain group of microbes are building a resistance to an antibiotic? What is the step by step process of realizing that and then combating that? Combating resistance to resistant microbiomes.
So, yes, inappropriate use of antibiotics is a big issue. Not taking the right dosage, the right length of time, that can impact a certain population of microbes in the body becoming resistant. And those sometimes are referred to as persister kind of cells. They persist. And so the course of action for trying to identify that is a little bit more complicated. They could take various type of saliva samples, sputum samples, fecal samples, and try to analyze and through various scientific approaches, try to figure out if there are a population of antibiotic resistant bacteria that are presiding in that particular person. And then once you're able to identify that specific group of bacteria, it may be possible. First, you want to figure out what panel of antibiotics they're resistant to, the specific bacteria may be resistant to, and then try to come up with different alternate antibiotic treatment strategies against that organism.
What is the process of identifying these compounds and stuff? Because I know at the beginning you said that your specialty is creating compounds or finding compounds that go against these resistant microbiomes or just the microbes in general. So, what is the process between learning what compounds you need to go against these microbes?
So we search various types of natural environments. We look for compounds produced by plants. We look for compounds produced by other bacteria, fungi, all different types of microorganisms. We even look for compounds that are produced in marine environments, like from sponges, a lot of different type of microorganisms. And so we will isolate extracts. We call them extracts. Basically, we grind the organism up and dissolve the extract material in a solvent, and we test it against various types of bacteria, right? And
Mhm.
that's very crude extract at that period, at that point in time. And so once we've identified what we call a hit, where we see some level of sensitivity to that extract, then we try to further purify that extract into its individual components that make up that extract. And then we'll go through and test all those individual components to identify the specific component that's involved in making the bacteria sensitive, right?
Yeah.
Now, the tricky thing is that it could be multiple components that's involved in that extract. It may not be a single component. So it can be a little bit more complex. But that's the general process. Normally, we have graduate students that do those screens or whatever. And so once we identify those compounds, we try to figure out the chemical structure of those compounds and see if they are already known compounds. If they are known compounds, sometimes we can do what's called drug repurposing, right? A drug that was used for diabetes that's being repurposed for another issue.
So you're kind of taking different things that are already made and then you or reusing it or repurposing it to serve a different function.
That's the case if we get a compound that's already known. Now, if
Yeah.
it's a novel compound, which we hope is a novel compound, then we're still trying to figure out the structure of that compound, right? And
hmm
figure out what the mechanism of action, meaning that exactly how's that compound killing the bacteria? Is it
Okay.
attacking what we call the cell wall, cell membrane, protein synthesis,
Mm.
transcription, all these different or metabolism, all these different processes that are happening inside the bacteria?
See, that makes sense. So these compounds are usually built to target certain parts of the microbe, which will enable or in turn like disable the bacteria in a way.
Yes, that's correct. That's very important because if it's something that has cross reactivity, meaning that it targets the bacteria, but it also targets a human, that lends to toxicity issues. So those
Mm.
compounds you want to kind of veer away from. You want the compounds that are low in toxicity, where only as much as possible target the bacteria and not the human.
Not the good bacteria.
You may get some cross, not necessarily good bacteria. You're going to get some antibiotics that will have an impact on good bacteria as well, right?
Mhm.
We want to keep that to a minimal. But more of a bigger concern, a larger concern, is making sure that compound doesn't physiologically impact a human, right?
Yeah.
So you want to make sure it only targets the bacteria.
See,
I
that
mean, you
makes
could think
sense.
about that as some cancer compounds, right? They have a negative impact on people. Though they benefit us, they cause harm too. And so with antibiotics, we want to make sure they're only benefiting us with very little harm, if any
Yeah.
at all.
Making
Yes.
sure that the disadvantages and the things that would harm us are kept low while still doing its function that is made to be to do.
Correct.
Yeah. And so it sounds like a lot of the compounds that you get are from natural environments. You mentioned they get from different plants, different fungi, even different sponges. So like aqua aqua agriculture, I think it's called aquatic agriculture and stuff like that.
Agriculture, yes.
Aqua agriculture. Kind of just to tie that in agriculture, this brings up an important need to develop research for different agriculture-based compounds because you said that a lot of these compounds come from natural sources that kind of fight things off, fight the microbes off. So, I want to ask you that, or let's put it this way: what we're seeing, or at least what I'm seeing in the field of agriculture, what we're seeing is that a lot of development, land development, is taking over farms and different sectors of agriculture, whether it be natural land, whether it be like certain or focused crop foundations and things like that. We're losing a lot of plants and stuff that could be used for compounds and microbes. So do you think that this is a major issue, or are the different compounds that you get from these plants and other organisms and other sources things that you can get just anywhere, if that makes sense?
Well, I mean, that's kind of a difficult question. So I think the loss of trees or plants, that definitely has a impact on geocycling, right?
Mhm.
Carbon fixation to nitrogen fixation, right? Those things are important in that sense. As far as like various types of compounds, we actually have isolated compounds from plants from Africa, from Jamaica, from
Mm.
the Caribbean. So they're kind of all over, right? Some of those undisturbed kind of ecosystems have untapped natural compounds, right? You've maybe even heard things people talking about looking at things in the Amazon, right? For example,
Mhm.
those undisturbed ecosystems. And so I don't know necessarily if it's a direct tie like that as far as what we see in the United States as far as potential for compounds because of removal of trees and plants. Since my sources are very kind of broad, geographically broad, and kind of the way we obtain compounds.
So you guys kind of you search everywhere in certain regions and certain underserved
Yeah.
ecosystems to get what you need.
Yes,
Okay, that makes sense.
researcher. But I will say in the aspect of agriculture and the use of antibiotics to kind of increase yield production, right?
Mhm.
That's a big practice, right?
Yeah.
As far as feeding antibiotics to cows or pigs or chickens or whatever. There's runoff from those facilities, right, into
Mhm.
lakes, streams, or whatever. And so then you're increasing the potential reservoir of antibiotic resistant bacteria that are naturally found in the environment at
Yeah.
that point in time. So that is a big concern.
What are the steps that are being taken to address that concern of runoff and the major antibiotic resistant microbes?
That's a little out my area, but I'm assuming that a conservationist, biologist would be better suited to address those kind of questions. I'm pretty sure there are policy implementations that have happened to kind of control that. Also, guidance on the amount of antibiotics that or drugs or chemicals that can be given to livestock.
Going on to section, we talked about microbes in daily life and how that plays into
Right.
our everyday life. So, where do people end up getting the most bad microbes? Are they getting it from food? Are they naturally being exposed to it? Where are these people who acquire these antibiotics getting these bad biotics and or bad microbes in the first place?
That is a very tough question. I don't know if I can pinpoint a specific source. Some people may say hospital, nosocomial infections, or people go in the hospital and pick up a lot of infections that way. A lot of the infections now could be due to lack of vaccination, which has become a big hot topic. And so there are different ways that people acquire infections. Usually it's through a lot of people to people kind of contact transmission.
Mhm.
A lot of that predominantly is viral though when it's people to people transmission. If it's bacterial, then it could be through contaminated surfaces, how we our sanitary practices, right? We in general have public health standards in restaurants and things of that nature, but those are random checks or checks that happen so often. What about the in between time that you're eating at restaurants? What's happening then?
Yeah.
I'm very kind of I'm gonna say germaphobe, germ conscious, right? Let's say germ conscious, right? One of the issues I have when I go to a restaurant is when people are talking over my food when they're serving me. Naturally, people release aerosolized material from their mouth, right? And
And then it
so
gets all up in your food.
all in your food, you're drinking everything, or they touch your plates with their hands and stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's just so there's a lot of transmission that happens through inanimate objects very naturally, right?
So what are some precautions that we can take to minimize the risk of bad microbes? Because now that you mention it, I have seen those times where it's like the waiter's hand is inside, or they're carrying it like inside the cup, or
Yeah.
they're talking, you trying to eat, and they come out, you can just see the spit flying out of their mouth and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it also goes into other things, like if you're at the mall and you saw somebody not wash their hands when they came out the bathroom. It's the
Yeah.
simple things like that we don't even think about that we'll be like, at least it's not my problem. But in reality, it is your problem because it can get to you in any way. So what are the steps that we can take to kind of get not or minimize that risk and stay away from the harm that microbes can do?
I'm kind of just following up what you just said, kind of description gave, just be more sanitary conscious, right? Your sanitary practices, your hygiene, all that will help control microbial organisms. Vaccination, that'll help as well. Not to digress, but kind of in this line of conversation here, I had students when I had a class, a microbiology class, I would have them do this study where they would go in the bathroom and count the number of people who washed or did either washed or didn't wash their hands, right? And then I would have them graph it out, right? And I compare the males between the female bathroom, right? It
I
was
think we know who wasn't washing
interesting.
their hands.
Yeah, it was interesting to see those results. So yeah, so just sanitary practices, being conscious about, but we have to understand microbial exposure is just as important too, right? Because it really helps develop our immune system, right? That's part
Mhm.
of immunity, and so exposure, there's a balance that has to be kind of reached here.
Yeah. And so, kind of tying that in agriculture, especially when we're looking at different farmlands where there's a lot of food handling or a lot of waste management, we see that there's a big sanitary, I don't want to say issue, but there's a big sanitary thought and kind of movement in within agriculture because when you're handling, let's say, cows and they're pooping everywhere, and you're getting all those microbes from the poop and stuff, and now you have flies, and the flies are on the poop, and now the flies are transmitting it, and now that the fly has landed on your doorknob, and now your hand's on the doorknob, and now you got cow poop on your hand. right? So it brings up a good point that we need to be conscious about when we're being sanitary, how we're being sanitary, and where these bad microbes could originate from that can impact us, right? Because like you said, we don't think about it sometimes, right? We do our business and then we're done, right? But we don't understand the little things, the very very little things that will impact us on our day to day. So you made a really good point.
I'm glad you mentioned the flies. That's one of the reason I don't like cookouts.
No, not the cookout.
I really don't like cookouts. I'm very apprehensive when I go to cookouts because of flies, because I know what they can transmit, right?
Mm,
And it's amazing once you become more conscious or more aware of things. The more knowledge you have, right? Sometimes it can be a danger too.
yeah.
Very cautious about things, right? And so, yeah, I do not like cookouts for that reason.
No, see, now you're gonna make me paranoid. I'm gonna go to somebody's cookout and be like, "I see a fly. I don't know if I can eat the food."
Yeah, I'm always covering the food up for people because they don't really cover it up. I cover the food, like, okay, cover this food.
So going into our next topic, we're gonna talk a little bit about the future of microbiology. I know that we kind of touched on this topic before, but I have some questions to go a little bit deeper. So,
What we've been talking about, the misconception that, people have about microbes that all are bad or dangerous, which is not the case, right?
mm,
A lot of people hear the word bacteria and immediately think germs and that make us sick, right? That's the
mhm,
first thing. But the truth is, like we were talking about, most microbes are actually harmless and are incredibly helpful to people. And as I said, you have trillions of good bacteria that live on or in the body that digest food, help us digest food, support the immune system, influence our mood swings. Believe
mhm,
in the environment, as far as the environment itself, microbes help plants to grow. There's a nice relationship between plants and microbes in the environment. Clean up pollution, like we talked about, oil spills and so forth, or gas, and they break down waste and release new organic material. So while it's true that some microbes can cause disease, as we talked about, the vast majority are either neutral or beneficial.
mhm.
So, microbiology as a discipline kind of helps us understand which ones are which and how to use the good ones to improve our health and food and the environment and how to combat the bad ones. So, as a discipline.
So going to our next topic or next question. So what are some of the or let me ask you so I know that what your main focus is creating compounds to fight against microbes that are bad, right? And to fight against microbes with a resistance. So I wanted to ask you that have you ever worked on genetically modified microbes?
So, not in the sense of agriculture. Well, yes, that one organism that I worked on, yes. But we genetically modify bacteria all the time. We're putting new genes in the bacteria, knocking genes out, changing the bacteria. So we genetically modify microbes all the time. We even make them resistant to certain antibiotics, right?
A good question. So what would be the purpose of modifying an organism for it to be resistant to an antibiotic? Want the antibiotic to work?
It has a research purpose in the laboratory, right?
Mm.
But the thing is that we try to control to make sure we're not spreading those resistant bacteria out into the environment, right?
Mm,
Yeah.
okay, see, that makes
Yes.
yeah, like, I really need this antibiotic. Well, too bad we're already working on making it resistant.
Now, as far as these genetically modified microbes and as it relates to agriculture, they do come with both exciting benefits and some important risks that we should consider. So, one of the benefits would be the microbes can be engineered to fix nitrogen, which we kind of talked about earlier, fix nitrogen more effectively, which helps plants to grow without needing fertilizer. Others are designed to protect crops from pests or diseases. You can manipulate the microbes to do that or helps plants to absorb nutrients better, like
Mm,
absorbing phosphorus better, which can lead to higher yields, healthier soil, less environmental damage for overusing chemicals. And so these type of manipulations are beneficial. Now, as far as the risk, one is concern is that if the microbes are modified, right, and then they're spread beyond the farm itself, this could disrupt the natural ecosystem, right? And it could outcompete native microbes. Okay. So that could be a disadvantage. There are also the possibility of unintended effects like microbes behaving different in the environment than in the lab. We can't predict how they might behave in the environment.
mm.
maybe totally something different. And of course, there's our public health concerns about safety and transparency, especially when it comes to food production, right? I know you maybe heard of genetically modified kind of foods too, as well. That's why it's important for us as scientists to test microbes carefully and constantly monitor their use. With the right safeguards, genetically modified microbes could be powerful tools for a more sustainable agriculture, but we need to do this responsibly, of course.
Yeah, because microbes, just like most organisms, can respond to stimuli in unpredictable ways.
Yes.
So if it's out in the environment, like you said, if something gets out in the environment and it disrupts the natural ecosystem of something, now that ecosystem is kind of getting like in peril because now it has something that is not supposed to be there. Or let's say something gets into our body or compared to someone else's body, and now that bacteria is working differently. If we don't manage it right, if we don't study it right, or if we're not safe with it, then like you said, these things will happen and it'll become an even bigger mess than what it was before.
Yeah. So think about it in the aspect of global warming. The temperature has really changed, right? And
It's
so
hot.
now we need plants that are more heat resistant or heat tolerant, salt resistant or drought resistant kind of areas. And so scientists, the research that scientists do affords us these opportunities to develop these different strain plants that are able, transgenic plants that are able to grow in these different environments, or microbes that help the plants grow in these different environments.
Yeah. So going on to our next topic, this is our last topic of the session. So we're going to talk about representation and education within the field of STEM, microbes, agriculture, and so forth. Why is it important to be a leader like yourself in STEM fields?
I don't know if I consider myself a leader, but I'll try to address that question. Being a leader in STEM, especially in the field like mine, microbiology, it's important because science and technology kind of shape our world as we know it.
Mhm.
From the food we eat to the air we breathe, that's important. STEM field helps to solve real kind of world problems and improve our kind of daily life. So as a leader, I can help potentially guide research and innovation in ways that are responsible, ethical, and focused on making a positive impact. It's also about inspiring others, especially young people or those from underrepresented groups, to see that they have a place in science too. Leadership in STEM isn't just about being the smartest person in the room, of course. It's about collaboration, communication, using knowledge to make a difference, whether it's improving public health, protecting the environment, or creating sustainable solutions. Strong leadership helps turn scientific ideals into real change. And kind of a footnote on this is that a lot of times there are not a lot of representation for minorities in STEM. And so being in that role is very important too, for students to see there's someone they can relate to.
So going on to our next topic or next question, what would you say to a young black or brown student that's interested in science, in STEM, or in microbiology?
I would say to a young black and brown students, you absolutely belong in science and maybe agriculture or farming. Your voice, your ideals, your background matters. Science isn't just about lab coats and textbooks, though a lot of people think it is. It's about solving problems in our communities, like growing healthy food, protecting the environment, and improving public health. Farming itself is powerful. It's not just planting seeds. It's about innovation, sustainability, feeding the future, if you will. And with your perspective, you can bring fresh ideals, solutions that others might not be able to see. So don't let anyone make you feel like you don't fit in. There's a space for you in labs, on farms, in classrooms, and in leadership. You just have to find a mentor or mentors, ask questions, stay curious, know that your journey can inspire others. So we need more scientists who look like you and care about what you do. So that's what I would say to a young person.
And just like you said, microbiology and science isn't always just, lab coats with the goggle and you got a little beaker and you're mixing
Yeah.
the stuff up, right? Just like how agriculture, people will be like, oh, you're in agriculture. So you're a farmer." I'm like, "No, like I'm not a farmer." Right? So people need to, for us at least, for Black and Brown students, so we have a lot of misconceptions about what jobs might actually be. And it's important for leaders and for experts like you to be able to break these things down and be like, it is so much more than what we think. Just like how microbiology is so much more than just, I got my lab coat, I got my petri dish, and I'm looking at
Yeah.
the thing, right? Or just being a farmer and being like, I got my cowboy boots on, I'm riding around on a horse trying to like, saddle up some cows or something. Like, it's so much more. Being in agriculture and being in STEM means you can be in a lab one day, you can be in a field one day, you can be running tests one day, you can be trying to gather samples, or you could be opened up to so many different things, whether it be food or whether it be animals, whether it be sustainability, life sciences, waste management, mechanics, engineering, so many
Right.
different things that people don't really understand, and that we need to be able to bring these people together and being like, there's so much more that you can do. And even though the field may not look like you still belong here, because when you're a face that another face can see, it brings so much more light to the situation.
Yeah, it does. I can actually say I was a farmer. I grew up on the farm. So
Mhm.
I am from a farming background. I didn't necessarily stay in that area directly, but I am from a farming
Mm.
background.
And so going on to our last question, we're going to talk about what's one thing that you wish more people understood about what you do, and kind of what do you wish that people would understand a little bit more about microbiology as a whole?
I guess the one thing I wish more people understood about my work is that microbiology isn't just about germs in a lab. It's about making a real difference in the world around us. Microbes affect everything from food we eat to the health of our soil, water, or even our bodies. And so they're constantly around us. What I do is I try to help solve problems when possible. Not all science is translational, some of it is for basic understanding. And so that's the one thing I would kind of like people know. So I would love for people to see microbiology as something practical, powerful, and full of potential, just not something hidden away in the lab.
So what's kind of answers my next question of the last part, but what's one very key takeaway that you want to leave our listeners with?
I want young people, especially those from underrepresented communities, to know that being in this field, that science needs diverse voices and fresh ideals, that there's so much opportunity to make a difference in this particular field.
Black and brown students to be able to go a little bit deeper and dig a little deeper to realize what these things really are. What does it mean to be a microbiologist, or someone who works in agriculture, or someone who works in sustainability, antibiotics, or just being someone who works in the field of science as a whole? And that's something that we need to do and kind of empower people to dig a little deeper and find out that these things aren't just what they seem on the outside.
Science is definitely about being curious. If you have a curiosity for things, then science is definitely for you. And whether I knew it when I was younger, I guess I always had that curiosity about things, how things work, how things look. And so that was always kind of my train of thought. And I never thought about being a scientist when I was that young. But I guess some of the things I did back then, if I look back at it, were kind of foretelling about what I would end up doing.
That's a really important thing, because you can't look at something, or let's put it this way. You can't rush life. You're never gonna know where you're gonna end up, what you're gonna end up doing. But as long as you stick to who you are, what you like, what interests you, what fuels you, you'll be able to figure it out, and you'll be able to be led to where you need to be in the future. It's like I sometimes you may not think about, like, you weren't like 4 years old and being like, you know what? I want to become a microbiologist. Like, that's just something you don't think about. Or you're not, 3-year-old thinking like, I want to look at petri dishes, and I want to create antibiotics. Like, those things when you're younger, or even when you're in, no matter if you're in elementary school, middle school, high school, you could even be in college and switch your major 8 times. You're still not gonna know where you're gonna end up and what you're gonna end up liking. You always gotta have an open mind and just be able to be like, you know what, I'm gonna try something new. And as long as you try something new and put yourself in a zone where you can gather information and learn more about yourself, or learning more about what's around you, you'll be able to do it.
Yeah, you will, because it definitely changes. I thought I wanted to be a high school teacher when I first went to college, and that changed.
Yeah, I have a friend that went from biomedical engineering to chemical engineering to social work. And so you were never gonna know what you're gonna end up doing. But as long as you stick with it, you'll be good.
Yeah,
You will
you
be good.
definitely have to have dedication and commitment to whatever you're doing.
Well, that sums up our episode for today. I want to say thank you for coming on to the show. Thank you for giving us a bunch of insight, knowledge, and wisdom about what you do and what listeners and people that are black, brown, or whoever need to do, and kind of the misconceptions about your field as well.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
All right. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one.
You too.